Hello, and welcome to a Purpose-Driven Marriage podcast. We are Dwayne and Nadine Stewart, and we love any and all things marriage. You've tuned into the right place if you're looking for actionable, practical tips to help you overcome real-life obstacles common to real relationships. We're here to help you strive for a marriage as God has designed it and not as the world has defined it. Because why settle for a good marriage when you can have a great one?
Hello, welcome back, everyone.
Hey.
Good. I want to say good to see you. We really need video.
Even if we had video, Nadine,
Yes.
we still wouldn't be able to see people.
That's true, but I pretend our listeners are right in front of us.
Glad to be seen.
Yes, glad to be seen by you, or glad to be heard by you all. So we're talking about a very popular topic right now.
Yeah.
A word that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
I hear it in my practice. I hear it with our kids.
Especially with our kids.
Exactly, with each other. I'm not even sure if they know what it means. I hear it all the time. And you know what's interesting is it's not even a new word.
Yeah.
But we'll go
I thought it was a new word because the first time I heard it, I was like, what does that mean? And I was like, I don't even understand what you guys are talking about.
I thought so too. I thought it was a new word too. But apparently it isn't. It's actually a pretty old word, but it's now being thrown around a lot.
Because it's basically a term that people have discovered that labels a feeling that they get from a certain situation, which is...
Yeah, gaslighting. That is the word that we are referencing, and that's a situation that we are going to be discussing today because it happens in relationships, it happens in marriage. Sometimes it happens without us even knowing that it's happening, either with us being gaslit or us doing the gaslighting. You know, it's just something that's become such a natural part of the way that we do things that we don't even realize how it's affecting the other person.
Right.
So we are approaching this a little bit differently because even though we'll tell you guys a definition of what gaslighting is, but we're coming at this from the perspective of there are going to be times when gaslighting is truly happening in the relationship and it's not healthy, right? Maybe it's happening intentionally.
Well, it seems like it's never healthy, right?
No, it's never healthy, but I guess
not always intentional.
Yeah, it's not healthy, but it's not always from a bad place, right? It's just having to change behavior that we didn't know was detrimental to the other person or to the relationship. And so, just as a lot of the things that we talk about, a lot of the communication issues that we deal with in relationships are not intentional. We just didn't know any better.
Right.
And so we learn.
And you don't necessarily know how it may make your spouse feel.
Exactly.
When you say certain things or when you make them feel a certain way.
Exactly. I always talk about how we want to be judged by our intentions, but our partner has to live with the impact. And so, this is one of those situations where although our intentions might be good, our impact, could be a detriment to our spouse.
Right.
And so when that's the situation, we need to make sure we change it, we correct it, and we do things in a healthier way. Okay, so gaslighting. Do you hear that outside of our home?
Yeah, I do hear it on like social media, on TV or stuff like that. I mean, at work, I wouldn't necessarily say I hear it a lot.
Yeah.
But I think in passing, the people that I work with are together all the time. So they say things like that.
Just joking around, right?
Yeah.
So what is it? Let's talk about what gaslighting is. Okay, so there's the formal definition of it is that it is a form of psychological abuse where a person causes someone to question their sanity, memories, or perception of reality. So people who experience gaslighting may feel confused, anxious, or unable to trust themselves.
Right.
Right. And here's the
So
crazy.
they're like doubting themselves because they're like, this is how I feel, but they're telling me something different. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with couples where they actually have gotten to the point where they've experienced gaslighting so much that they don't even know their own memories. They thought they remember things a certain way, but they've been told, oh no, like, remember, you've got a horrible memory.
Right.
You don't remember things as they happen. And so this is actually what happened, right? Or, something like No, you're just being too emotional. That's not really.
Or too sensitive.
You're too sensitive, right? That's not really the situation. You're just being too sensitive about it. And so then they begin to doubt their own emotions. They begin to doubt their own response or reaction to a situation because they're being told that no. It's just your overreaction that's causing this issue. But it's really a non-issue. Right. And so that's what gaslighting is, right? When we begin to doubt our own perception of reality.
Yeah, definitely. I can see how that can be a challenge because I think we've talked about this before, because there are certain situations that might trigger a feeling or an emotion in you. And the other person might feel like, wow, that's an overreaction. Like, what in the world just happened? Like, this is crazy. Like, I'm not sure what's going on, but you're taking it too serious, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, it is something that triggered you in some sort of way that is serious to you. So it needs to be addressed, but it may not necessarily be like the intention of your spouse to make you feel that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But, there are those situations
or it could
when,
be.
I was going to say, there are those situations when it is very intentional.
Yeah, for sure.
For the professional gaslighter, right? The one who knows exactly what they're doing. They are being intentional about it. They are trying to make it so you start doubting whether or not your reality is the reality, right? It becomes your word against theirs. And since your memories, your perspective is not trustworthy, right?
Now
and I'm putting that in quotes, not trustworthy. Now, they're like, oh, you're just overreacting in this situation.
Right.
And so, but I wanted to go back because, we thought that gaslighting was a new term. And both of us realized, like when we were doing research for this episode, the term gaslighting actually comes from the name of a 1938 play and 1944 film called Gaslight, in which a husband manipulates his wife into thinking she has mental illness.
Yeah, it's always got to be the husband. Why? Why is that the case?
It's a movie.
I feel like women are more manipulative.
You think so?
I don't know. I just said that.
You just said that. You just wanted to say something. You're just being petty. You're just trying to gaslight me.
Yep.
Am I even using that correctly?
No, I don't think so. Maybe, actually.
I don't know. Now you have me all confused.
That was totally intentional.
So, but anyways, I think it's funny because, well, not funny. I think it's interesting because that movie, husband manipulating his wife into thinking she has mental illness, that right there, it's fiction, right? It's from a writer's imagination. But believe it or not, this is actually something that I hear
all the time.
I hear it very commonly, like, oh, he's making me think I'm crazy.
Right.
Or I had one couple years ago who they'd get into an argument, and she got to a point where she was bringing recordings of their fights into our session because he was telling her that things did not happen as she recalled.
Right.
And he would say, remember, your memory is really bad. Remember, you have this tendency to, you don't remember situations. And so she began to doubt herself, and she actually used the words, I feel like I'm going crazy, or I felt like I was going crazy. And so she began to record their arguments.
Right.
She began to record their fights because she didn't trust what she was recalling or what her reality was the truth, the actual reality, because he had convinced her somehow that it wasn't, that she was recalling something completely different from what actually happened. And so she would bring in these recordings and she'd say, see, Nadine, see, it really is happening. I'm not crazy.
Right.
And so I find that interesting that the movie was based on that, because I do see that.
Maybe that husband watched the movie.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I've never even heard the movie.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that our listeners know that gaslighting is not one-sided, right? It's not just husbands doing it to wives. It really doesn't matter who it's coming from. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
Wives do it too, right? So it's not just the husbands doing it.
I feel like it's something that's learned. I mean, it might have been something that they have seen, other people, maybe family members, parents, whatever, sisters, brothers, exhibit in their relationships. And they were able to get things that they wanted, because it's really a selfish move, right?
Yeah.
I mean, coming down to it, it's not loving. You know what I mean? It is not compassionate. It's selfish, right? Because you're trying to cause, I don't know, conflict within your relationship, especially within the spouse, in a situation where it doesn't need to be.
I think you bring up a really good point earlier. You mentioned about how, why is it always the guy, right? And I don't think that gaslighting is really limited to the men or to the woman. I think anyone has the ability to gaslight. But I also think, and again, this is just me, putting two and two together, right? But I think that gaslighting, in a way, is a form of defensiveness. And I think when we look at defensiveness, although both men and women have the ability to be defensive as well, I often see it more in men, right? The act of defensiveness in conversation. And oftentimes it's because they don't want to be wrong. Right. They don't want to be perceived as incapable or, failing even in the conversations. Right. They don't want to feel less than or seen as less than. And so the defensiveness may pop up, and that's when gaslighting may happen, from the male side, right? From the husband's side. But again, it can happen to either men or women.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but let's talk about, what does it look like? Like, how do you know if you're being, is it gaslighted or is it gaslit? Right? Because everything I've read says gaslighted, but
doesn't sound right.
Yeah, it doesn't sound right, because I would say I lit the fireplace.
Right.
Not I lighted the fireplace. But anyway, it's
like the word funner versus more fun.
Exactly.
Funner is now a word.
Yeah. So, well, if there's any English majors out there, please forgive us, because we're doing our
I'm gonna
best.
say gaslit.
Gaslit.
That's
okay.
So
if you're,
it makes
sense.
It makes sense to
right?
me.
Okay. So, how do you know if you're being gaslit or if you're gaslighting someone? Let's talk about examples of things that we hear, phrases that we hear that are really common, when we're having conversations in our relationship, right? In our marriage.
Yeah.
So if I say something like, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Right.
Am I gaslighting, or is that perfectly okay?
Well, it seems to be you not apologizing. That's what it sounds like to me, because you said something and they were offended by it, and you were like, so what? I don't care, because you shouldn't be offended that way. You know what I mean? That's basically what it says. Well, to me.
Yeah. And when you say, I'm sorry you feel that way, that right there is a form of defensiveness, right? Because that tells your spouse, hey, I'm not the problem.
Yeah, you are the problem, because you felt that way.
You're the problem.
And you responded in a way that you shouldn't have responded. This is how you should respond to what I just said.
Exactly. So that's gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right? When you say, I'm sorry you feel that way. And by the way, that's one of my biggest pet peeves. When it comes to an apology, please don't ever say that.
Yeah.
Don't ever say, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah.
A better way of saying it, a more respectful phrase that's not gaslighting your spouse is, hey, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Right? It's taking accountability.
Yeah.
Because that's really one of the ways to overcome gaslighting. If you discover that you've been gaslighting, you didn't mean to, or maybe you did mean to, but now you're turning over a new leaf and you want to be better.
But I do feel like really gaslighting is a form of not taking responsibility,
100%.
Accountability over your actions, right? So, I mean, all the things that you might say to somebody in response to how they feel or whatever is you saying, okay, well, this is what happened, but no, I don't want to take accountability for it. So I'm going to basically make you feel bad for how you responded.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's gaslighting.
Yeah. And another way would be, something happened, whatever it was, and your spouse comes to you and tells you that, this is what happened. This is how I feel about it. And you say, that's not what happened. That's not how I saw it. I didn't see it that way. Like, this is actually how it happened. And then all of a sudden now you feel like, oh, well, wait, like, didn't we experience the same thing? But for whatever reason, you see it differently. How is that?
Yeah, exactly. Right? And, it's okay to have two different perspectives.
Yeah.
Right? It's okay to be at the scene of the same accident and have completely different accounts of what happened. That's okay. But don't dismiss the fact that the other person may have a different perspective from you. So telling them that's not what happened, that's gaslighting. But letting them know that, you know what? That's not how I thought it happened. Right? Something as simple as that.
Right.
Just saying that's not how I
or
thought.
I saw it happen, or how what I experienced,
or
whatever.
Really, like that's how you saw it happen. My experience was this, right? Like accepting the possibility that you can have two different perspectives, two different experiences, and embracing that and allowing both to coexist. Well, how about this? Okay, so this one I see so often, it really bugs me too. So imagine a couple, they're arguing, right? And one person hurt the other, and the one who's hurt is complaining about it and saying, I was hurt because of this, and I wish that hadn't happened, and this has happened before, and I really wish, it would stop, or whatever it might be, right? And then the other partner responds with, well, I guess I'm just a terrible spouse then. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't have married me. Yeah. Maybe you should have found someone better than me. Right?
Yeah. It's like that self-deprivation, or is it something else?
Yeah. Well, there's no accountability. Right? There's no accountability. It's like now the focus isn't even on the issue anymore.
Right. It's on them.
It's on them. Well, woe is me. Right?
Now they're just having a pity party for themselves.
Exactly. And they're turning the focus away from the real issue. And now what they're expecting is their spouse to be like, oh, no, honey, you're not a terrible person. No, I would never want to marry anyone else. Right? Rather than taking accountability and saying something like, what I did was wrong.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Right?
I know, Nadine. No, it's good. It's good. It's true, though. That is true.
Or, this is something that we actually talk to one of our kids about often. And that is like making jokes, but at someone else's expense.
Yeah.
Right? When you say something, and even if you think you're being funny, right? And it hurts me. And if this is a recurring thing, if this is a pattern that happens all the time, right? Like where you're saying jokes because for whatever reason, when you start putting your spouse down, even if you do it under the guise of, it's just a joke. I mean, that's contempt.
Right.
And we already know that's toxic to a relationship. Like you don't want to be contemptuous ever. But when you say something like, wow, you can't even take a joke. Like, it just sucks that you can't take a joke.
Yeah.
I can't even just joke around with you. You take everything so seriously.
Yeah.
Right? That's gaslighting.
What's interesting about that, I do feel like that one is kind of a gray area, in my opinion.
How so?
Because I think that there should be some element of lightness, you know what I mean? Laughter, jokey, whatever. And sometimes I think the whole premise of a joke is to make fun of something, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily in a bad way, but just in a way that just, it's funny. You know what I mean? But there is an element of also knowing your spouse and understanding how they receive those types of things. And, there might be couples that just joke about each other all the time, and that's totally fine because one says something and the other one is like a joke battle almost. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that's cool, right? But then there's other situations where, it might seem more one-sided, or it might be, the joke might cut a little deeper than what the spouse is expecting or hoping for. Yeah. It is not funny anymore. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I think that there should be an element of having fun, that type of stuff. But then at the same time, you need to understand, read the room and understand your spouse and what they would deem as funny and what they would not at all. You know what I mean?
And we're also looking for patterns, right? If this is something that happens once in a while, no big deal. But if this is a recurring thing where jokes are being told at the expense of one spouse.
Yeah. Especially in front of people. Is that what you're saying? In front of people,
yes. Like that right there is not good.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't want to do that all the time. And then, like you and I, for example, we like to have fun with each other. We joke around all the time. But then there are certain times when my feelings may get hurt because I'm like, wow, that went too far. right? And if your response to me is, wow, Nadine, you can't even take a joke, right? Like that would hurt.
Right.
That would hurt. I'd be like, you know what? I joke with you 99% of the time. This time it hurt. Like that went too far. And at that point, I want you to take some accountability.
Right.
I want you to recognize that, hey, you know, I did go too far with that one. And that's okay. Right. It's not an all or nothing. It doesn't mean that we can't have fun with each other. Right. It's just like you said, reading the room in those instances. And then also identifying if this is something that happens all the time. Is this a pattern that is always happening? Right.
Yeah.
Where jokes are being told at the expense of another person. And then let me see one more example. This one, I think, so we've talked about this a little bit, but I think it's actually probably one of the most common. And that is, you know, when if someone were to say, oh, you're just overreacting as usual. You're just too sensitive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, that one is almost a way for that person to make themselves feel better about being harsh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I do feel like there's many situations where, you know, people might say, oh, so you want me to lie? You know what I mean? You don't want me to express my feelings. That's how I feel, or that's what I see, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they say something, but it's like, oh, no, but you're overreacting to what I said. Well, I'm not sure if that's really the case. Because if you say that to anybody, they might say the same thing back to you. Matter of fact, they might smack you.
Well, how do you know? Like, if so, those are examples of some of the common phrases that we hear, right? That could be gaslighting. And what isn't. But how do you know if you might be getting gaslit, right? If you think like, and it's usually as a result of these types of things that we just mentioned, but if you're constantly questioning your memory or your feelings, right? Like that couple I told you about where she's like, I don't know if I'm remembering things correctly. I'm being told that my memory is wrong.
Right.
Right? Like the events of that evening wasn't as I recall it.
Inaccurate.
Yeah, exactly. They're not accurate. And so she started recording conversations and recording arguments that they would have just to make sure that she didn't continue to feel like she's going crazy. Or I have another couple where she's actually gotten to the point where she now just agrees with him. You know, he says, oh, you know, she doesn't remember things. Her memory's really bad. And she'd say, oh yeah, it really is really, really bad. So I just go with whatever he tells me. Right. Like there's a possibility. I mean, who knows? Maybe in that instance, her memory is really bad. And he's actually helping her out by like being the memory keeper for them. But
she just needs to write things down. That's what she needs to do.
Exactly. Keep a journal everywhere with her.
What was it? There was a couple movies where I remember where a guy just literally forgot like 5 minutes ago, so he would have to write everything down and then read it on his little notebook or whatever.
Isn't that Finding Nemo or Dory or whatever?
No, it's not a cartoon.
Not a cartoon. No. Okay, yeah, they can't write.
So now I'm like frustrated
that you can't remember.
I would remember after this, I bet. So,
so if you find yourself constantly questioning your memory or your feelings, or here's the other one, if you feel like you're always the problem.
Always the one that's wrong.
You're always wrong. You're always the issue. And gosh, you know, when you meet someone in that state, it's actually really sad. I've had couples, you know, they come in and they are talking about their perspective on their relationship. Our first sessions are usually made up of the two people and then me. So there's three of us. And then to sessions 2 and 3 are usually one-to-one sessions, right? So it's me and one of them, one of the spouses, and then they take turns. And it is a really sad thing to witness when a spouse actually talks themselves out of their feelings, right? Like, oh yeah, this is what's been going on with our marriage and this is how I've been feeling. And then they start to say things like, but maybe my spouse is right. Maybe I am the problem. Now that I think of it, I am kind of, you know, such and such a way. And this is my issue. And like everything they say is almost a put down about themselves. And it's watching it is really sad. And we can say that, oh, wow, look at them. They're taking accountability. But there's a difference between taking accountability for your actions and taking blame for all things.
Yes. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a difference. And
because there's a certain level of reflection that you should have based on whatever is going on in a relationship or a conversation or whatever, something that happened. But at the same time, it can't necessarily always be you reflecting.
Yeah.
And then the other person just saying, see, you need to go back and change some things, you know? And that's not right.
Exactly. And so, if that's happening to you where you feel like you're to blame for all things.
Well, it could be them always wrong. I mean, it could be.
It could be. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's totally valid. But if you're hearing it from the other person that, see, you're the problem. You're always the problem here. And so you begin to believe that, maybe, just maybe, there might be some gaslighting happening, right? Another one is when you feel confused after most conflicts where you're like, what the heck just happened?
Right.
I don't know. Like, I came into this conversation wanting to ask for this, and now I don't even know. I don't know what just happened.
Yeah.
Right. Or when there's always a denying or rewriting of the past. Right. No, that's not how it happened.
Right.
Right. So maybe, those are some examples of things that could indicate, not saying it does, but it could indicate that there might be some gaslighting happening. Now, there's a lot of people that I would tell you, they're listening to this that probably don't even know that they're gaslighting, right? Because again, the intentions are good. Right. It's not always bad. It's not always from a bad place. And for many couples out there, they love their spouse and they want to do right by them. But then we do things, right? We make mistakes. Just like as I was telling you, we communicate in a way that is not always healthy, not because we intend to hurt, but because we just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so you could be gaslighting someone. You could be gaslighting your spouse.
I guess that's a question, because in certain situations, I mean, you're meeting with a couple and, you notice that one of the spouse is saying certain things and talking themselves out of their feelings, right? They feel a certain way and they say, oh, well, maybe it's me because of this and that. And then, the other spouse comes in and you're like, okay. Yeah, dude, I think you're gaslighting. You know what I mean? Or have you recognized that before? So from my perspective, I'm wondering, like, how do you address it?
Well, what it looks like is one thing. I'll address that first. When I'm seeing that this person is regularly minimizing their spouse's feelings, right? It's, the person that's saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. And that's a regular occurrence. They might just be gaslighting, right? If you feel the need to win the argument, right? Like winning is...
Well, everybody feels that way, though.
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think everyone feels the need to do that. And I'm not like holding myself to some high and mighty anything, but, my desire is connection.
Yeah.
Right. And so connection sometimes requires that I prioritize you or the relationship over winning.
In your experience, have you felt that way in the discussions that you've had with couples?
In what way?
Or that each person is looking to win the argument?
I've seen it. I've definitely seen it. And that's one of the biggest reasons why they end up seeing me, because they never get to a point of connection or resolution.
And I would think that there are situations where both people are gaslighting.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. And I'm
just like
sure
a gaslight party. Just like all kind of stuff.
Yeah. I see that, right? I see instances where both people are gaslighting one another, and they've just gotten so good at it.
Really bad.
Yeah, they've just gotten so good at doing that, like they can't get out of it. And so the other thing that I see people who gaslight do, or I hear them say, is when they start telling their spouse, you're crazy, or you're too emotional, or you're irrational, or that's not what happened. When they are rewriting events, that could be an indication that there might be, some gaslighting.
So once people have identified and I guess uncovered the fact that there's this issue that they have in the relationship, what's like the next step? How do we fix it?
Oh, the next step is to have the conversation and take accountability if it's you that's been gaslighting your spouse, right? So if listening to this episode, if you recognize patterns of gaslighting within yourself and you're like, oh boy, like I have been doing that. And I think I've been gaslighting my spouse. Really, the very first thing to do is start taking accountability, right? Start taking accountability. You may even bring it up to your spouse and say, hey, you know, I realize that I've been minimizing your feelings, or I haven't been taking accountability for my part in our conflict or in our conversations and our arguments. Replace minimizing with validation, right? Like rather than saying, hey, you're just being irrational, you're being overly sensitive, validate the fact that they're hurt. Like their feelings are hurt, whether or not you agree with it, whether or not you think it makes sense that their feelings hurt. Just validate it. Say, hey, you know what? I can see that hurt you.
So that you recognize the fact that this is how you feel and they see it, right? I see how you feel and I want you to know that I recognize that.
Exactly. And if you realize this and you want to make a change, but you struggle to know how to do it, like in your conversations or even to repair the damage that's already been done, contact someone for help. Like, go to a professional, go and seek couples counseling, couples coaching, and they'll work with you to figure out how to repair what's happened. Now, if you're the one being gaslit or gaslighted, we still haven't established what the correct term for it is, but we're going to go with gaslit.
I'm lit.
Right? Gaslit. And so if you feel like this is something you identify with and you're being gaslit, and it's not just, you know, like every now and then thing, but like you're seeing a recurring pattern and there's damage that's taking place. I would say keep a journal, not to keep score,
right?
But just to make sure you remain grounded in reality, right? You're not being convinced or convincing yourself that your memories are false.
Right.
Or your experiences didn't really happen. So just keep a journal.
Right.
And just so you
for your own sanity, I guess.
For your own sanity. Exactly. And when you're in the midst of it, you know, ask direct, calm questions like, hey, can you help me understand why you're trying to tell me that didn't happen? You and I were both, you know, at this incident. Why are you telling me if that didn't happen when I know I experienced it? Right? Please help me to understand that. And then setting boundaries, gentle but firm boundaries. Like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to allow you to speak to me that way. Right? When you're ready to start hearing my perspective, or when you're ready to treat me with respect, then we can continue these conversations. But until then, I can't talk to you about this because you're being disrespectful to me. And I would like for you to treat me in the same way you want me to treat you. Right? So those gentle but firm boundaries. And the other thing is, if it's abuse, because this is a psychological abuse. Like if it truly is happening in your relationship and you're seeing this pattern and you're truly experiencing this, go get help. Because going through abuse in any form is damaging. Right? Like abuse isn't just in the physical form. Go seek, you know, a therapist, a counselor, go speak to your pastor, whomever it is, go and seek help. And even bring it up, like when you're setting those gentle but firm boundaries, maybe even bring it up to your spouse. Say, hey, you know what? I think there are certain parts of our relationship that we need to repair. Let's go and get some help.
And that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking that I'm hoping that the spouse would want to do it. You know what I mean? Because if you recognize it and it's affecting you in a really negative way and kind of causing you to spiral, then you're like, all right, well, this is what's going on. We need to get help. But then, you know, the spouse is like, why do we need help? We don't. Like, everything's good, right? Or not me.
And you. If they're unwilling to accompany you, if they're unwilling to go to couples counseling or get help together, go and find help on your own. right? Go and get help. Like, you need the support.
Right.
Because we like to think, I mean, you and I are optimistic when it comes to relationships, because really we want all marriages to work. You know, but the fact of the matter is, as much as we don't want gaslighting to exist and we don't want to believe that people would do it intentionally, it does happen. And it does happen intentionally in a lot of relationships. And so if you're in that situation and you're experiencing this, where someone is altering your reality, making you feel like you're crazy when you know that you're not, right? And it's affecting not just your marriage, but it's affecting you as an individual, go get help.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I would say to that. And so I hope that's been helpful for people out there. I know that we spent a lot of time laughing about this term, but it's serious for those that it is happening to. Right. And you had said when we started this episode, you know, we need to make sure that we tread lightly also, because we don't want people to think that what used to be accepted as just a couple having fun now is a form of abuse.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's true, right? We want to make sure that we emphasize the fact that these are usually patterns, right? It's damaging. And there are times when we do this and the couple are in agreement, and it's not necessarily a damaging thing. It's just us having fun with one another. But if you find that this is hurting the relationship, and you know that your spouse is willing to have the conversation and is equally invested in the relationship, then have the conversation. Talk about it. Talk about how it's making you feel, and talk about how you would like for them to speak with you, how you would like for them to take accountability, and you'll do the same. And then if it is a hurtful pattern, right? If it's something that's causing damage to the relationship, causing damage to either one of you, then you definitely need to go and seek help. And if only one of you is willing to do that, then one of you go and seek help. Okay.
I mean, and really, in my estimation, have to believe that, you know, anybody in the relationship knows that something that they have done is causing like harm or some sort of really negative feelings, causing them to feel bad about themselves or whatever it is towards towards their spouse. You would think that they would want to change that. You know what I mean? Especially if there's passion, compassionate love involved in that relationship. That's what I would think. I mean, obviously that doesn't happen all the time, but if you know that, you know, there's something that's going on that you may be causing, you'd want to change that. You know what I mean? You want to change it as soon as possible. That's just me thinking, but I know that doesn't happen all the time, but you know, my prayer is that the couples will come to a realization of those things and want to repair it and make things right.
I really, you know, it's funny you said that your prayer is that, because as you were saying that, I was thinking, gosh, I wish and pray that relationships out there were as you think they are.
Well, I know, because I don't get to see that all the time. You know what I mean? It's just, you know, it's tough. Sometimes it is tough to understand that, you know, someone can go from just blissful love and adoration for each other and then get to a point where they just despise each other. You know what I mean? And they're causing people to feel a certain way on purpose because they don't want to feel bad about their own feeling or about their own actions. You know, so you know, sometimes I have this blissful idea of how all relationships are, and I know that is not the case, but you know.
Yeah, well, in terms of gaslighting, you know, going back to today's topic, there are a lot of instances where it isn't even where a couple goes from being blissfully in love to all of a sudden doing this. In a lot of cases, it's been built into the relationship because it's something that was brought into it. It is, you know, a way of being, right? It is something that maybe one or both people learned from childhood, right? Or a past trauma.
I agree with that.
Or, you know, whatever it might be, a communication style. And so oftentimes they bring it into the relationship, even though they may have started off being blissfully in love, but it's just always been there. Not realizing how much damage it's causing. Right. And so again, going back to what you were saying, I sure wish, babe, that we get to a point where all marriages look exactly as you imagine them in your head.
Yeah.
unfortunately,
you might be out of a job, No, but
I don't want my job. I would quit my job. I would quit my job today if that meant that all marriages, all couples were just doing amazingly well, because I do what I do because there's a need for it.
Yeah.
But if the need no longer exists, I would gladly give up what I do now for that.
But then you would just switch modes, right?
I would just switch modes.
Switch it from, making good marriages great.
Yeah, exactly.
You know
exactly.
what I mean? And that's what it's all about. So
exactly. So
I love it.
Yeah. With that, thank you guys so much for listening in. And if you know anyone that can benefit from listening to this episode, please share this episode with them. And until next time, go on out there and continue pursuing that purpose-driven marriage.
Amen.